Hello, true crime fans. Welcome to Debate the News True Crime. This is part 2 of our George Stinney Jr. episode. If you have not listened to the first episode, I recommend you go back, listen to part 1, George Stinney Jr. Enjoy.
What fascinated me about this case was not just how egregious it was in 1944, but how there are still people with all of this information and they're still choosing to think the same way. It's just not as shocking because the system and the people who inhabit it, they're more clever, more undercover, more underground than before. However, we may come to times where those individuals will rise up and do these kinds of things again right in our face with no care and concern because they feel like they are protected. That is what I'm concerned about and why I wanted to bring this story to Debate the News, True Crime.
Thank you, Vashon. And you bring up a very overarching, interesting point. You had spoken in one of our previous episodes about the Lewis brothers, and you made a very profound point about how racially motivated and hate motivated crimes or injustices still exist today. They just tend to look a little bit different and maybe aren't as easy to recognize for everyone. So I think that also applies to this case.
Frankie Deitch, the aunt of Betty June Binnicker, the fact that she wants to continue this and has no empathy or thought process of understanding like what a farce everything was. There would be no closure after so many years. After 70 years, I feel like she's in her own poison. Her anger must be so palatable. She just drinks the poison. It's too bad because why wouldn't you want to make sure that you're clearing a name when you really look at the facts? This whole case was a farce.
I was actually shocked to hear that many of the family members were saying that they still believe that George Stinney Jr. was responsible all these years later, unless they had access to some information that the public hasn't seen yet. When you look at the totality of the evidence, which is little to none, there's no clear path that I can see that leads to him being the culprit, except for the fact that he happened to be one of the last people to see them alive, and they claim that he gave a confession, but this is a 14-year-old. I don't think it's surprising that a 14-year-old under that kind of pressure with no legal representation, no parents, would falsely confess or just say whatever they wanted him to say. If that even happened, it's not documented, it's not recorded. I just find it shocking that the family members still to this day, many of them believe that he is responsible because the evidence does not support that.
In my mind, I'm thinking they must know something I don't know, right? Because I guess I'm just as guilty. Are they normal people? Are they horrible people? There has to be something in Stinney's character. There has to be some information that was being dispersed at the time. There's nothing. They believe this because of long-standing beliefs, okay? This is it. How can you, in your right mind, in 2014 to 2025, or whenever this case was reopened, say that you want to rely on a confession that supposedly happened in Jim Crow 1944 South with a 14-year-old without the presence of their parents or legal representation, that you want to hold on to say that he confessed, all right? Police officers involved in the arrest told them directly to not doubt his guilt. This is the reason why these people have held on to this. They have chosen to deny new legal evidence. This is what really gets me. Sometimes when I sit in these rooms and some of you say some of these things, I just want you to know 20 to 30 years from now, people are going to listen to it, think you are absolutely insane, right? Because this is how I feel about these individuals. What they said was that Stinney was tried and found guilty by the standards and procedures of the time and that the process should not be reexamined, even though it was grossly unfair and resulted in the death and murder of a 14-year-old child. Go figure.
I agree, Vashon. It's completely illogical and irrational to draw the conclusion that George Stinney Jr. is even likely responsible for this when you look at the evidence. And that alone points to some type of bias going on that you would take the facts and somehow make that leap to that conclusion 100%. So I will say that one big question about this case is if George Stinney Jr. didn't kill Betty and Mary, which I don't believe he did. I think everyone who's spoken so far has vocalized that they don't believe that he did. And in my opinion, the evidence points to he didn't do it. So if not him, then who? Because there's not so much information about the investigation because it was A, a long time ago, and B, they didn't really seem to make much of an effort to actually investigate it in the first place. Who killed them? To me, I would want to know what individuals outside of the police department were really pointing fingers at him and pushing him as a suspect. Because those people, in my opinion, would be at the top of my suspect list. Someone did do this, and of course it would benefit them to try to point the finger at George Stinney Jr. to take the heat off of them.
Well, that's a plot twist. I did think to myself, what kind of person would have committed this? And I thought that this was like maybe like a serial killer type or, some real psychopath because the girls, they weren't raped, okay? And they were brutally murdered, right? It wasn't like it was some kind of accident. It seemed very intentional. I just don't know. Like, my question is, I put myself in this situation. If it was someone that I loved or cared about or I grew up hearing, there's no way I would not want to know or try to get to the truth. Why was there such a commitment to being so convicted that this boy did this? I just absolutely 100% don't get it. And I don't get how someone can make it to 2014 and still feel that way.
This would be pure speculation, but if I had to respond to what Vashon just proposed, I would ask the question of, this possibly be a cover-up? Could a family member possibly be involved? And is this just a simple matter of trying to deflect from the real killer?
Ooh, you know what? The person who most likely did this, who was rumored to have this deathbed confession, that would make sense. Somebody's crazy, psychopathic adult son committed these murders, and the police were paid off or somehow otherwise involved. I mean, don't get me wrong. You could say just pure racism. They could have chosen another person who had like some kind of record or some kind of history or something along that lines, but they choose him like in an opportunistic moment, Oh, he said he saw the girls with him and his sister. Listen, he was 14. When I was 14, I was 5'2", probably 105 pounds. This kid was 5'1". Listen to this. He's 14 years old. There's some boys, they're 6 feet by the time they're in the 9th grade, okay? He's 5'1", 90 pounds. Just think about that for a second. And they believed that he was responsible for brutally murdering 2 girls. It just doesn't make a bit of sense to me. Does this case, anyone in the room who supports the death penalty, make you rethink that at all? The possibility that this could happen to someone innocent and we see a real life example? Or do you feel like so much time has passed and technology is so much better and that your thoughts are that innocent people aren't put to death?
I'm going to say no. I am in favor of the death penalty only in very specific situations. The first threshold is there has to be a mountain of evidence. It needs to be very clear that this person committed the crime they're accused of. George Stinney Jr.'s case doesn't even come close to even touching that first threshold for me. The second threshold is if the individual continues to present a danger to other people from inside the walls of the prison. If that individual is likely to order violence perpetuated by other people, and they are likely to do that given the opportunity, that is when I think the death penalty is appropriate. Think about a situation where a leader or someone who's calling the shots is convicted of murders or egregious crimes beyond a reasonable doubt, and that individual will still have the ability to order violence and killings in that type of situation, and really only in that type of situation, do I think that the death penalty is appropriate over a life sentence. George Stinney Jr.'s case is nowhere near that type of a situation, so no, this case does not make me reconsider my position.
This is very interesting. And maybe I need to kind of reframe the question. During that time in Jim Crow South, if asked, do you support the death penalty? Would you say the same thing? Like, are you saying like ideologically or in theory? Whereas I'm speaking in practical application. So is it ideology that you support that people should be put to death if the merits warranted? But I'm talking about actual application. So in 1944, during those times, do you feel like you would have supported the death penalty?
No, in 1944, I would not have supported the death penalty because it's very clear that that was not anywhere near a fair and balanced justice system. And we can make arguments about present day justice system not being fair and balanced, which I would agree with in many cases. But at this time, absolutely not. There was so much racism. It was not a fair playing field by any means. And this George Stinney Jr. case is a perfect example of why there were so many issues with the justice system at that time.
All right. So now let's fast forward to 2025. And from a practical application in our system that exists today, do you support the death penalty?
Yes, I do. In very specific cases, if it is likely that they will still continue to order acts of violence or harm other people from within the prison system, that's a situation where I think the death penalty is appropriate.
Okay. All right, Joseph. I just want to say that I deeply like you because I understand I don't support the death penalty, but it's because I know that we live in an imperfect system. This is the problem that we're talking about, that people have to be careful and cautious of. They think that they're thinking differently in the times that they live in. But I will tell you that if you feel that way now, in 1944, South Carolina, you would not have felt differently with the information that was presented to you and based on the psychology of that time as far as what was normalized. So this is the thing, just like if we dial it back and we go to medieval Europe, when they used to just like you do something on Friday and they cutting off your head on Sunday, they would have perfectly thought that was okay. So if at any given point, a person thinks the death penalty is okay, they would have thought the same way during those times. They just don't know that because they think it's different. The issue I have with someone saying that they support the death penalty because it's an extreme naivety, because we know the outcome of capital cases can depend on factors such as where the crime happened, the race and social economic status of the victim, the local community prejudices. Like we understand that the wealth of the victim, we know that, right? And we know that convictions are happening every day, and we could not necessarily legislate morality in our states or across our country to say that it has to meet some kind of legal threshold. We know that people are framed. We know that people are accused of doing things that they did not do. So my point in saying this is, and Joseph, I love you, but you're either for it and you are okay with an innocent person being put to death. And some people are. They say, hey, it's a casualty of war. Our system's imperfect and there's going to be casualties. And that's what they believe because we know that our system is unjust. So we first have to recognize that. If we could be 100% without any racial or socioeconomic bias, without differing laws and climates and cultures, across our states, without the ability for a person to travel to Texas and something to happen, without police officers that are crooked and willing to frame, then yes, maybe. But keep in mind that 53% of exonerations currently are that of Black Americans. So that lets us know that we still live in a very unjust system and we cannot cherry pick. We are either for it or we are against it. And there is no kind of filtering process that allows us to say that, well, in this case, because that's just not how it works. I'm sorry. Anyone else?
I'm glad you actually said that to Joseph, because when you asked that question, I answered it in my head and I said, yes, I do support the death penalty now. And I knew that I would have supported it back then. That's exactly what went through my mind. It's like, yeah, I definitely would have supported it back then, because I would have believed that justice is justice. And I know that as a person of color, justice wasn't equal, and it's disproportionately administered to people of color, particularly Black men. So I want to put that out there, that I'm aware of that. But I do believe in the death penalty. I'm vengeful. Okay, if someone hurts and takes a loved one of mine, I definitely want to have that option on the table. That's just me. I understand that, a lot of people may not feel that way. I haven't matured yet. I guess I still have some growth to do. But yeah, I do believe in the death penalty. And I know that with everything that's going on, with all of the technology that we have now and the science that we have now, I think we can be a lot better at proving someone's guilt or innocent. And if there's any doubt whatsoever, that we take it off the table. But if there's really no doubt that this person committed that crime, caught on video, whatever, you know, 5 people walk in, whatever, and there's irrefutable proof that this person did it, I'm all for putting them to sleep.
Well, Jonathan, now I got a little smoke for you. You support the institution that allowed for this to happen, and it is still happening. There's a case in Alabama that happened a few years ago when someone was put to death because they were simply in a trap house. They did not shoot, they ran. Police officers were killed at the hands of another person, and they still put him to death. So if you are okay with it, then that's okay. I get it. But you are the same as those individuals, vengeful, bloodthirsty, wanting your revenge. And that's okay. Guess what? Technology is going to actually make it easier to frame you now. Even though we have DNA technology, now we have AI technology that can put you in places and videos that you never were. As long as people are wicked, as long as they are biased, as long as the system is flawed, there is nothing that can save anyone. I mean, I don't get how people think these things can happen. Do they happen all the time? No. But can they happen? Is our science without flaw in a system that is flawed? Absolutely not. But I get it. And I heard you say you hadn't matured yet. I'll check back with you in 5 years. Doing life. Over to you.
Well, call me crazy, but let me just go ahead and get in line with Jonathan and Joseph. I did hear your question, your initial question. I did hear your follow-up question and clarification, and I still stand where I was in the beginning. So I too still believe in the death sentence as a form of punishment. Let me just say this, my disclaimer. Vashon, I always value your intelligence, your intellect, and your perspective. I do not necessarily agree on this particular situation. The way I look at it is the death penalty is a form of punishment for an act, for a crime. So if you're asking me, do I feel like it's an appropriate form of punishment? I do feel like it's appropriate form of punishment. The application of that punishment is what's in question to me. The legitimacy, the appropriateness, the evidence proven. But should it be a form of punishment? Yes, I still agree that it should be a form of punishment. It being a form of punishment is not the issue. It's not the problem, if you ask me. The problem is the justice system and the proving of the case, the proving of the facts leading up to, okay, now we're at this point. We've proven this beyond a reasonable doubt in a criminal case that this is an act that took place, a crime took place, an offense took place. And we've tried this appropriately, fairly, adequately, and the highest degree possible. That's where the issue comes in. It comes in the trying and the justice of the case. And that's where we need to do a better job of avoiding the inappropriate application of this form of punishment. So, just to summarize it and be clear on my stance, the issue is with us prosecuting and the justice side of the case. My issue is not with the form of punishment when it's appropriately applied.
Doing life. I don't know you well, but I like you. All right. And I can understand your positioning. I'm not here to challenge anyone's thoughts and ideas or trying to convert you to a person who's against the death penalty. I just want you to be clear when you say you support something, what that means. And it cannot be the narrative that you might be playing in your head. I wanted to make sure people understand when they say, for whatever their reasons are, they support the death penalty. Now, what you talked about is the application of death as a punishment to a crime. And I can't challenge that because you're saying, okay, hey, listen, if you do something that is worthy of death as the punishment. Now, keep in mind, you don't get to legislate that either. In China, they put people to death for having drugs. So you don't get to say, in this case, if it's murder only, or you don't get to legislate that, right? It's not what you get to do. When you say that I'm okay with it as a punishment of the crime, you don't get to decide on which crime is applied for and by whom. I just want to make that point and then think about human history. Death has always been a penalty for a crime, whether it's the person you did the crime against or the institution that makes the laws. Putting people to death has never been applied fairly in our entire human history. It's amazing that our country, that our nation, okay, that we still impose this barbaric practice. So I support your thought and agree with you on the second half. We align there. But on the application for a punishment, now consider death penalty does not deter crime. We're not any safer as a result of it. Okay. And keep in mind that there has not been a date to this day where we can say without a doubt that we are not innocently putting people to death. And if you're okay with that, you're okay with that. We just have to admit it and just move forward. Like one of my girlfriends who's pro death penalty, she said they probably did something else anyway. That's her theory. Okay, we're going to rock with that. But doing life, you still okay with me. I think we've gotten down to another subject matter, which I'm glad it took us down this path. But back over to you, Joseph.
Vashon, I just want to respond really quickly. You've definitely opened up my mind to think further into my position on this. I do still maintain that I am for the death penalty. I don't think that option should ever be 100% taken off the table for all cases, which is what abolishing the death penalty would mean. I don't look at it from such an all or nothing perspective. I think there's nuance to it. In an idealistic world, I think we should set a much higher threshold for when we apply the death penalty. But like you said, I don't get to legislate that. But in a perfect world, I think the bar should be much, much higher. But I do think the death penalty is also a tool that can help catch people who genuinely are guilty of crimes. For example, in the Idaho College murders case, Brian Koberger pleaded not guilty to the brutal murder of 4 college students. They were gearing up to actually go to trial, and the prosecution offered him a deal, and they offered to take the death penalty off the table if he just admitted that he was the one who did it. And there was a mountain of evidence to support the fact that he did it. It was not a George Stinney Jr. type case. They had the evidence. It was just a matter of, is the defense going to be able to get him off on a technicality or poke enough holes in the procedural case being put forth by the prosecution to get him off? Because the death penalty was an option, they were able to leverage that, take it off the table in order to get that confession and that conviction. And now he's off the streets. He's in jail for the rest of his life. So I do think it's a little bit more nuanced, but I'm definitely going to reflect on this a little bit more after this conversation.
Well, I want you to reflect on one more thing. And I appreciate that. I do. Because that's all I want. You know, at the end of the day, after your reflection, you still hold firm because sometimes people don't have perspective. And, Jonathan, sometimes I'm shocked when he supports this because he's actually represents a population of people that could potentially be adversely affected. And, I can understand if you think, well, this is not going to impact me or it's not going to impact my family. But see, I think about those kinds of things. I put myself in the position that if someone I loved and cared about was facing the death penalty, right? Like let's say, for instance, one thing that will definitely get you the death penalty is shooting a police officer. Do you think there are not a lot of cases where a person has to defend themselves against the police and then 20 years later, they're put to death? I mean, the nuances, they're definitely there, but the system and the nuances of the system don't matter. Because if it's unfairly applied in one area over the other, from one state, from one judge to the next, that could be you. But sometimes we might not think that it could be us. Therefore, it's easy to support it. Now, I want to mention some of the top countries that still use the death penalty. When we think of ourselves as a country, what are we saying? So China by far have the highest number. You have Iran, Saudi Arabia, Egypt, Iraq, Vietnam, Pakistan, Bangladesh, Nigeria, North Korea, right? There are a lot of other countries, but the top countries are the kind of countries that also believe in practices of political repression, torture, and a deeply flawed judicial system. These are our peers, okay? These are our peers in death penalty cases, and most evolved first world countries consider its practice barbaric and incompatible with modern justice. The United States continues to face domestic and international criticism, not just within, but from the rest of the world, for racial bias, wrongful convictions, and arbitrary applications from state to state. Okay? Perpetuating a punishment that is seen by much of the world as inherently cruel and outdated. So it just amazes me that these people that I admire, love, and respect, that there's still alignment with the death penalty. I don't get it, y'all. I hope that we have this conversation maybe in the years to come, and maybe you might think about it differently.
Absolutely. And I appreciate the pushback because that's definitely something to think about.
I was thinking what my answer would be, and Vashon has opened up my eyes. Last time I was asked was by the judge. I think it was, it's like around 2009, if I believed in the death penalty. And I told him that I wasn't really sure, but if it's a crime against a child, I would be more apt to say yes. The case was actually two adults, so I got accepted into the jury pool. So I don't even really have, Vashon, like a strong answer. Also having a friend of the family who is finally, hopefully, fingers crossed, getting exonerated, and seeing how the court system had treated him. And it wasn't just like one case. When you really dug down, it was this whole county and their misuse. Um, I just want to say that I'm not even sure how to answer that, really, because it just depends. So I don't know if there is one answer.
I just want to say thank you to all the contributors, Mariana, Doing Life, Jonathan, and of course, Adrienne and yourself, Joseph. This was really great, and I am just immensely excited. We had the opportunity to be a part of clearing George Stinney's name. Thank you so much for allowing me to come in and share this case in perspective. I'm hoping that it gives a lot of people a lot to think about, even in this day. I hope it allows people to examine how they think about these kinds of things. The psychology is not different. Only the egregiousness is different, but not the psychology of how people come to conclusions regarding these kinds of situations.
I'm really glad that you brought this case up. And now that we talked about it, I feel like I want to share it with everyone. I don't think here in Florida that this would be a story that would be taught in American history and civic class, though I feel like it should be. And I feel like teaching these miscarriages of justice, especially for this young age, people could understand these miscarriages and make sure that it will not continue today.
Thank you for joining us as a guest co-host. Thank you so much for bringing this case. Again, I had never heard of it. I think, we haven't all agreed on our different points, but I think it's definitely been a productive discussion. And I think people have brought up a lot of interesting points on both sides. Thank you for joining us for this episode of Debate the News True Crime. As always, we appreciate you listening and being a part of our discussion. We'll be back every Tuesday and Thursday with another case and another conversation to delve into. Until then, stay safe, stay vigilant, and have a good night.